Hello, one and all. If you're listening in live, thanks for making the time for joining us on your busy day. If you're watching this later on YouTube, thanks for stopping by. However you're watching, welcome to Postmedia's Driving into the Future Roundtables, where we'll discuss, well, the future of driving. I'm David Booth, and I'm the senior writer for Postmedia Driving.ca. Today, we're going to talk to our panel of experts about autonomous automobiles. If you're like me, you're more than a little confused about self-driving cars. Every year, we're promised that they're right around the corner, and sort of like balanced budgets, we're still waiting. Then there's the safety question. On one hand, we're promised that robotic cars will be completely eliminating fatalities on our road. On the other, well, Tesla and Uber. And even if autonomous cars are less accident prone, what price is all this safety? Will self-driving cars drive us around like the proverbial little old lady from Pasadena? Will we be allowed to drive in the future? Hell, will the car of the future even have a steering wheel? More importantly, at least for us here in Canada, how will robot-driven cars cope with our nasty winters, our snow-covered roads, and all the sand and salt we throw on them? To help us answer all these questions, we're joined by Ryan Eustace, Senior Vice President of Automated Driving at the Toyota Research Institute, Stephanie Bruinsma, the University of Waterloo's Manager of Industry Engagement, and Paul Rudy, co-founder of and CMO of Kyocera SLD Laser. And lastly, but not least, Rod Kadri, head of Ontario's Autonomous Vehicle Innovation Network. Welcome to you all. And before we get started, let me remind viewers that we'll be trying to answer your questions at the end of our discussion. And guys, the questions this week speak to Canadians that are both wary but also eager for autonomous driving. So, before we can discuss the pros and cons of self-driving cars, we need to understand exactly what a self-driving car is, or more officially, the level to which they can drive themselves. For this, I'd like to turn to you, Stephanie. Why don't you give us a quick walkthrough of the various levels of autonomous self-driving, and give us examples of each, perhaps, so our viewers better understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, thanks, David. So levels of autonomous vehicles go from 1 to 5, where 1 and 2 involve ADAS systems, which are advanced driver assistance applications such as parking assist, cameras, and cruise control. Whereas level 3 is where we start to see the vehicle take over full control. So level 1 is driver assistance. So that's your backup camera, you turn your signal on and your side camera comes on and you can see the curb or cars in your blind spot. Level 2 is partial automation. So there's steering control, but the driver can't actually take their hands off of the steering wheel. Level 3 is automation. So sometimes the vehicle can take over completely from the driver, which means the driver can remove their hands from the steering wheel. But the driver must be able to take control at some points in time. So then we get to level 4 is high automation. So the vehicle at this point can do all of the functions of the driver, but it can only do it under very specific conditions. These would be dedicated lanes on a highway, for example. And then level 5 is fully autonomous. So the driver can lay back, have a nap on the way to the meeting at this level of automation.
Yeah, and that's where we're, all promised. But right now, we're basically at about level 2, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, even the Tesla Autopilot and GM Super Cruise, you still have to keep your hands on the wheel. And if you take them off for more than 15 seconds, they're supposed to shut down, right?
You're 100% correct. We are at level 2 automation. There are certain circumstances where we're seeing level 3. Those are under very controlled environments. A shuttle program is a really good example of that, or on a restricted campus where the vehicle's conditions are well known. So we're starting to see level 3 there. But the cars that we have on the road are level 2.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. So, Ryan, all the hype is about fully autonomous vehicles, those level 5 self-driving cars that Stephanie just described, that you can be asleep in the back seat and you can get driven around. But I think Toyota is taking a different approach. What is that, and how does it help to make our roads safer?
Yeah, actually, thanks for the question. We're taking basically a dual path approach to this. So we are, like many others in the industry, working on the full levels of automation, and we call that what would be a Toyota chauffeur system, where the car would be responsible for the driving task. Offering the driver both the convenience aspect of that, as well as when we think about it, also access for those that may not otherwise be able to drive. So if you think about people that are disabled or blind, being able to offer them mobility. But there's another dual path that we have to this, which is our guardian approach, which is to use the same core of that technology in terms of perception, prediction, planning, but really with an active safety mindset. So not to think about eliminating the human from the driving task, but to think about how do we make you superhuman in the driving task. So how do we use an AI system to fundamentally think about pairing with the human driver to don't leave the road, don't hit things, don't get hit, and really to address the safety side of this. So when you look at some of the statistics in the U.S., we talk about in the order of 37,000 or so fatalities per year. To put that into context, that's like a Boeing 777 kind of going out of the sky every 3 days in terms of digesting that number. And then when you look at it worldwide across the globe, it's about 1.25 million fatalities per year. That's like 11 777s every single day. So when you think about the opportunity for some of this automation and how we think about bringing it to market to really save lives as soon as possible, this is where our Guardian First approach to think about how we pair AI with the human to really make a tremendous impact and think of making cars much safer than they are today, and that we can deploy that sooner than the full automation scenarios that are described by the kind of the level 4, level 5 systems.
Well, myself and pretty much everybody who loves to drive thanks you for having this Guardian thing, because a lot of us are worried a little bit that, if self-driving cars become mandatory, we might not be allowed to drive. So if you can make us better, maybe we'll be allowed to drive further in the future. Rod, what's the government doing about all of this? Last week we had a panel on auto manufacturing, and we found out that Canada, more specifically Ontario, is looking to become a leader in battery production. In the same vein, what is Ontario, the hub of auto manufacturing Canada, got to do to be first ensure our roads are safe, but just as importantly, how do we become, in Ontario, in Canada, leaders in this self-driving revolution?
A great question, and thanks for asking it. I would argue that we're doing a great job already in Ontario to lead the future of the automotive mobility sector. And I think you mentioned it very well. Ontario is a hub for auto manufacturing and has always been and will continue to be, as well as a hub for global suppliers. So along with that manufacturing, we have companies that are already supplying technology into the global automotive sector and have been for a number of years and will continue for a number of years. And with the change in technology and how technology is starting to take shape in the auto sector and turning it into a bit, the term is being coined as the mobility sector, we see that with Ontario's strengths in automotive and Ontario's strengths in IT, and then couple that with our strong entrepreneurial cluster, our innovative startups, our high quality post-secondary institutions, our top tier talent, we've got all the ingredients to continue to drive forward and continue to be a leader in the automotive and mobility sector. And the government of Ontario has done a fantastic job. We're lucky to have a very supportive government through initiatives like AVEN to support the commercialization of homegrown technologies and solutions by local companies and essentially making sure that they get into the global market and help to support the change in the sector, the transformation of the sector, and drive more technology.
Now, is most of these hub in Ontario centered around Kitchener, where Stephanie works at the University of Waterloo? Because University of Waterloo is one of the very big names in this. Or is it in Toronto? Is it spread out, or is it very much focused around the University of Waterloo?
I'd say across our entire province. I mean, it's definitely Kitchener-Waterloo, as we all know, is a hotbed for great technology, great entrepreneurship, a fantastic post-secondary institution. Places like Toronto are also very well known, but Ottawa, Hamilton, Windsor, Essex, and you just go across our entire province. We have clusters of of assets and clusters of knowledge and industry that's already working in areas that are making up the future of the auto sector, CV to X, cybersecurity, mapping, transportation, logistics. So our province is very much geared for the future, and it's happening across all our regions. And of course, not to take away from the University of Waterloo and Stephanie and the work that they do. It's fantastic. It's very well known, and I think Ontario is a leader because of their contribution and the contribution of other regions across the province.
Paul, thanks for joining us from California. I'm guessing it's a little earlier for you than it is for us. And so I've got to apologize. I'm going to go a little techie on you, ramp up the tech stuff. Acura just announced in Japan that it's going to be the first, I think, anywhere in the world to sell a full level 3 autonomous car. And to remind you again all, that's a car that can drive all by itself without your hands on the wheel on some roads and in some conditions. Not all the time, but it is more autonomous than even GM Super Cruise and Tesla's Autopilot. But it turns out they're only going to make 100 of them. They're only going to be sold in Japan, and they cost about $125,000, almost double what the car costs here. And they say the problem is the cost of the sensors to get beyond our current level of autonomy. So what is it about the hardware? What are the challenges for self-driving cars to see roads ahead that cost so much?
David, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure. Yeah, we've seen this pattern as we first brought laser light to headlights. The initial deployment, you start with, say, a pre-runner. The pre-runner, is used to really start the technology. LiDAR specifically have, of course, been deployed in all kinds of defense and avionics and robotics, high-end applications. So without scale, the sensors are absolutely are challenging cost-wise. Now, once you get the pre-runners rolling and you get those first vehicles out there, I think the first run of laser light was, hundreds of vehicles as well. Within a few years, you can start moving into, hundreds of thousands of vehicles and millions of vehicles. There's a bunch of tools in the toolbox here, right? There's the camera, the ultrasonics, the radar, and now the LiDAR sensor, and all that needs to be fused together, as well as the cost of the new sensor itself. So yeah, there's some work to do for sure. It will take time, and the challenges are addressable, but it will take scale and time to bring them all together.
Now, your lasers, your laser lights, and their range finding, that sort of takes the place of what, radar or the camera or both? Can you do something like make a 3D holographic image out of it? What exactly does the laser bring to the table of trying to find, be able to see a cat on the road, 500 feet away?
Yeah, it's a great question. So laser lighting, initially we brought to market for illumination reasons. So, this is range, visibility, safety to augment sort of typical low beam, high beam headlights. And then styling benefits, efficiency benefits came along with that. Now, this new functionality of sensing from the headlights is something we're really excited about. So turning the headlights themselves into not just illuminators, but into eyes that can see and sense. Sort of coming at it from the bottom, lower cost end of things, these laser lights can just do basic ranging, right? With far better, orders of magnitude better resolution than a radar could. And if they're tucked into the headlights already and sort of co-propagating with the white light, it's really elegant, commercially, integration-wise and cost-wise. And so sort of coming at it from the bottom that way, we can really augment, reinforce, even replace long-range forward-facing radars that have challenges with resolution, with range, and in certain challenging environmental conditions that, up in Canada, you know a lot about. So yeah, we really do see laser coming in just the ranging to start, And then, of course, lasers are used in LiDAR, and our sources can be also turning headlights into full LiDAR systems. That will come a bit later. And again, those will be more complex and will have the cost and scale sort of adoption curves that you'd expect with new innovation.
Sounds exciting. I want a laser light just to say I have a laser light on my car. I really do. I do. It sounds so cool. Ryan, I'm going to go back to you. And going back to the focus that you mentioned on the Guardian systems, which I guess are called automated, not quite autonomous. How much safer are cars with advanced driver's aids? And how much safer can automobiles be made in the future without going to a full autonomous setup?
Yeah, thanks for the question, David. And so I guess maybe to characterize, I would call it active safety when we talk about the Guardian First application. So really, we think about the human as being, responsible for the driving task. So it's his hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. But when you think about using a full AI stack continuously kind of running in the background, understanding and processing 360 degrees around the car at all times, understanding the other drivers on the road, pedestrians, predicting what their future interactions are going to be with our vehicle. And fundamentally, we really think about how do we have a general purpose capability to don't leave the road, don't hit things, and don't get hit. When you look at some of the statistics in driving, over 90% of accidents really have kind of human error at the root cause of it, whether that's drowsy, distracted, drunk driving accounts for some of this. So I think when you look at some of the impact that already kind of pre-crash active safety systems are making today in modern cars. So for example, we offer as standard equipment, nearly all vehicles now in North America and Japan are Toyota Safety Sense system, which is basically a frontal camera and radar system. That allows for like automatic emergency braking, where it helps to avoid a lot of the kind of rear end crash events that you would typically get, where the vehicle will be able to sense that there's an impending crash happening, and then be able to automatically apply brakes to try to prevent that crash from happening. And so with Guardian, we really see this as kind of taking that core philosophy of a Toyota Safety Sense system and just taking it to that next level, kind of on steroids. To think about really, braking, steering, really this idea of blended envelope control with the human. How do we really take the best aspects of the human driver with the AI to blend those two skill sets in a complementary way? And we think that with this strategy, we can begin to make an impact by introducing this technology at scale on personally owned vehicles, like the Toyota and Lexus vehicles that we own today, to really make a tremendous impact on that 1.25 million fatalities that happen worldwide today. And so that's where we see this approach with the Guardian First as part of our strategy to really make an impact on saving as many lives as possible, as soon as possible. At the same time, it shares the exact fundamental DNA and same technology as full self-driving in terms of perception, prediction, and planning. So it's on this longer technology arc that we have within Toyota of how we actually are ultimately getting to a full self-driving capability that we can bring to market when the time is right.
I remember reading something that was saying that the problem isn't that humans don't have the ability. I mean, our eyes are just as good as anything that computers are using and everything else. It's that a computer is always on, and we occasionally are not on. We're looking, we're texting, whatever the case is. So is it more about the consistency of the computer-driven car than the quality of the driving?
Yeah, definitely there's an element of that, right? So the kind of vigilance level of the human in the driving task. So for many reasons, like you said, distracted, drowsy, that the human, we kind of ebb and flow through time, right, in the driving task in terms of, how attentive we are. Whereas a AI system is always, it's not going to get tired. It's not going to get drowsy. It's always going to be able to process all the time around you. And so importantly in this Guardian First strategy, again, we're not trying to eliminate the human from the driving task, but really think about how do we pair AI with the human to kind of make you superhuman. So by thinking about, where's the driver's eye gaze? What are they kind of paying attention to? Maybe the car can be aware of, say, maybe objects in the environment that we know that the human maybe isn't paying attention to. How can we draw their attention to that? Or also, how can we kind of blend and kind of assist the human, if you will, to be either informing, warning, or even beginning to kind of give them some gentle nudges to kind of work with them to help avoid some of those riskier situations.
Thanks a lot. Stephanie, I've visited you in Waterloo's Autonomous Labs. Um, I got to say, the work you're doing, both in the upper level research and some of it with the students, is just great. I even drove your experimental car. I love the name Autonomous. Um, but I remember that in my drive, because I went up there in the winter, it had a little bit of trouble driving completely autonomously. It kind of veered for snowbanks and stuff. It was having trouble seeing and reacting to stuff. What causes robots to get, shall we say, lost on Canadian roads in the winter? And what are the most difficult situations in winter to navigate? And what do you think the solution will be?
That's a great question, David. Thank you. So yeah, snow is a very difficult problem, and one Canadians like us are specifically interested in understanding how we're going to solve it. So the answer to kind of that problem, I would say, is positioning, okay, and sensors. And I was so excited, Paul, to hear about the headlight sensor because I think that's awesome. But sensors are going to be key, and to your point, they can get covered in snow and ice and salt and whatnot. So it's more important to rely on not any one sensor specifically. Okay, so the car is going to be a mass of sensors all over the vehicle, but it's not just important on the vehicle itself. Sensors have to interact with sensors on the infrastructure. So that's why, fully autonomous or moving these vehicles, it's going to have to involve municipalities, governments, so that when the car loses track, like if the vehicle is looking for a line on the road, for example, okay, and that line is now covered in snow, the vehicle can then rely on GPS, which is going to create a positioning system with a building that's nearby. Or if you're on the highway and you're going on a bridge, that bridge can tell you definitely in space where it exists, and it can do the math to know where the sensor on your vehicle is to know exactly where you are in relation to those markings. Of course, it's very complex, and you also have to make sure that those sensors can talk to one another in an efficient manner. But that is how you solve that problem, and it's not just on the vehicle. So, it's not just on Toyota to solve it on the vehicle, it's on the governments to say, okay, how are we going to instrument it, and how are we going to fund that?
Excellent, thanks, Paul. I'm going to go back to something you ended with about the laser range finding and how it might solve some problems here, in Canada and probably in Michigan where Ryan lives as well. Here's the thing: I've driven many cars that have adaptive cruise control right now. They use similar sensors, radar sensors, to keep the distance between the car in front of you constant. The problem is not one of them has ever made it through a long drive. Like I drive often in the winter, 1,200 kilometers in a weekend. And never once has one of these cars gotten completely through a Canadian snowstorm without failing. Either the thing gets so covered in snow and ice that it just shuts down and says the adaptive cruise control is gone, or the salt and the sand that we put into the onto the roads gets into the connections and it just conks out completely. Can your laser lights solve these problems? And do you think they'll be able to get through the worst of Canadian winters? I know this is something that matters so much to the readers. It's the most important question that we've received for this panel.
Yeah, it's a great question. We are working hard to solve that problem, and we do believe we can. The technology is capable. It's very, very practical approach we're taking. By putting the ranging capability into the headlights. As long as you have functioning illumination from those headlights, you'll have photons going out and being able to sense it. Very good resolution. One of the really important remarks or themes that's come up is a variety of sensors is needed to make these systems really foolproof. And what we're doing with our sources is we actually have wavelength diversity. So even within the laser light sources that are being integrated into sensing headlights now, and we have projects running with tier ones now on this. So we're hopeful we can help you and achieve this here in the coming years. We have wavelength diversity. So we have an infrared, we have a visible. There are different ways one can use that to actually have multiple sensing capabilities then, depending on the filters in camera systems. So as long as you've got a windshield wiper that's keeping your optical sensor clean, and as long as your headlights, are putting light out onto the road, then our sensing headlights should be a great fit and should be a way we can address this. Long term, full-blown 3D LiDAR headlights, of course, are a really exciting toolkit for this solution. But in the near term, what you're talking about are, radars or other sensors that are sitting in the grill. They're getting clogged up. They're getting jammed up from the normal stuff. I went to graduate school up in Rochester, New York. I know exactly what you mean. We had lake effect snow there. Crazy challenges. But as long as you dust off your headlights in the morning, then you'll be able to have sensing capability, and those radars in the grill or in other places in the bumper won't fail.
Thanks very much. Well, I'm hopeful that you'll do something, because even if it's just lasers to help adaptive cruise control, we don't even get to full autonomous. It'd be a lot better than what I've dealt with so far. Rod, what's the government's role in this in terms of setting regulations? I believe that driving and licensing of cars is a provincial matter. In fact, I think even in the States, Ryan, it's a state matter. But cars end up quite far from home. Do different jurisdictions have different rules on autonomous? And wouldn't one countrywide or even a continent-wide set of regulations make developing self-driving cars that much quicker and that much faster?
I think it's a great question. There's a lot of, and going back to how Ryan laid out from an industry perspective, where the technology is and the priority for technology is really focusing on automated technology at this juncture. And we talked, and Stephanie laid out the levels of autonomy. At this point, we're at active safety, using automation to increase the perception of the driver in order to increase safety. As technology starts to develop and is tested and proven out, there'll be broader discussions. So if you look at in general standards and regulations and policy, there's the government works, of course, within its own jurisdiction, across jurisdictions, to normalize and standardize certain regulations and policies to ensure that happens. But at this point, I think we're still in the development of the next level of automation, and with where we're at for active safety or for increased safety using these technologies, we can still drive the cars with the policies and the regulations that are available today. I do want to note that as we develop these technologies, in what the government of Ontario has done is has put out pilot testing regulations, which are industry renowned for prioritizing safety and making safety the number one priority, but also enabling innovation. And through that, a lot of projects are underway in the province. And so that also provides an opportunity as those technologies are being piloted safely, to look at how do they work, and then also start to develop policy and regulations to address them when they do come in the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Ryan, how is driving going to change in the future, even with advanced driving aids or when we go fully autonomous? I've actually driven, or actually more accurately, been driven in lots of robot cars, including the Waymo minivans in Southern California. And I got to tell you, it's a frustrating experience. It literally felt like it was the little old lady from Pasadena behind the wheel. So are we going to get chauffeured around in slow motion like Driving Miss Daisy? What's it going to be like being chauffeured around in these automated and autonomous cars in the future?
Yeah, it's a good question, David. Well, and again, I guess there's when we look at those different levels of automation that Stephanie first spoke to at the beginning, with like the level 4, level 5, where the vehicle really is responsible for the driving task, and the human really is a passenger and does not have any responsibility for the driving task. We're starting to see some of those applications today, not as a car that you own, but as more of as a mobility as a service, kind of the robo-taxi sort of scenarios. There's a few reasons for that today. I mean, one, the economics of it, that as we spoke to earlier, some of the sensing technology and compute that we put in these cars today is expensive. But when you think about the mobility as a service application, it's more like a taxi where the utilization is much higher. A personally owned car, we drive it 5% of the time, 95% of the time it just sits there. Whereas like a taxi is much higher, greater than 50% utilization. So in those robo-taxi scenarios, because the utilization is higher, the economics work in your favor for being able to put more instrumentation, more sensing on those vehicles to support the full driving task. So that there's that aspect of it. Another kind of key aspect of those mobility as a service applications, though, is the idea of an operational design domain. So when you think about that robo-taxi that you've ridden in before, it's actually kind of geographically, I would call it geofenced to a certain operating environment under which they've already kind of pre-mapped all the roads. They know in advance, the route, A to B, where you're trying to go. It gives them actually a lot of information to know with confidence that, yes, I can send the robot taxi versus I can send the human-driven taxi to service your ride. So that is one of the paths that we are seeing to now in the level 4 regime of automation, of beginning to kind of bring that to market. I think it's going to take many, many years, though, where that begins to kind of slowly creep out from what I would say is the deployments today are in more fair weather sorts of environments, like typically, Paul sitting in California, kind of the southwestern sorts of the U.S. are some of the regime where they operate today. But as we think about, I'm originally from northern Michigan, and in these northern climates, as we get into some of the challenges that Stephanie was speaking to about weather, it's going to take many, many years, I think, for this technology to kind of advance and to be at a level of robustness and deployability to really get into these northern climates. So this is also informs, I guess, why in Toyota, we're not solely focused on the automated aspect of trying to eliminate the human from the driving task, but thinking about how do we begin to bring this technology to market as soon as we can with this idea of our guardian first approach, not to replace the human driver, but to complement and enhance the human driver. And importantly, David, it goes beyond just thinking about the safety application of this. We actually think that we can increase the joy of driving of the driver by giving them a level of kind of comfort and security to know that you've got this kind of AI co-pilot at your side and can actually give you a level of reassurance as you are the driver, but we're helping to make you superhuman.
Okay, sort of close to the answer I was looking for. I'm going to move over to Stephanie. So I'll make it more pinpoint. I've been driven around a lot in taxis in New York. Now, if you're a taxi driver in New York and you're polite for even 1 nanosecond, you're going to get eaten alive. I mean, if you don't push and shove and stick your car out and nose it out at an intersection, you'll just never get anywhere. Autonomous cars that are driven by robots will have very specific rules, and they'll have to adhere to, a very stringent set of road safety. They'll have to go by the book. How are we going to manage that? I mean, is that going to be AI that'll learn to do those things? How are we going to manage that?
You're reminding me of the classic problem we talk about with autonomous vehicles, where you've got 4 autonomous vehicles at a 4-way stop, and who goes first? And they're all too polite to make the move. You're absolutely right. There's a lot of research happening on this problem specifically, and a really interesting intersection between vehicles and human behavior. So on one side, we're looking at drivers. So we've got a project right now where we're mapping drivers. So instead of doing the automation, we're taking, 100 different drivers. I think it's closer to 500, but anyway, it's a large number of drivers, and we're monitoring them over the same route to determine, what their behavior is like, to see if we can map the average driver. right? I'm more of a lead foot. People get a little bit terrified and grab the handles when I drive. And of course, you've got the more cautious drivers. But measuring drivers' behavior to kind of map out that average driver so then we can train the vehicles to respond like a typical driver would. And then the other piece of that is getting pedestrians or people who interact with cars who aren't necessarily in the cars. And that's going to be a tough problem too, because especially, you know, we're talking about Canada, and Canadians can be very polite, right? So this can mean a thank you or a go ahead, right? And I can signal that to a driver, but how do we get a car to recognize that interaction? And so these are research questions we currently have projects on and are trying to find an answer to. I hope that close to answers your question, David.
Very, very close, in fact. Okay, Paul, I'm going to, ahead of time, go to a reader question here. We've covered it a little bit, but I think it bears repeating so people will understand. Ross asks, how do you handle poor quality or absent lane markings? Do self-driving cars need pinpoint precise electronic maps? The reason why I ask is Tesla is fairly famous for saying they don't need, certainly not 3D maps. And I'm just wondering, like, you know, I mean, even your laser sensors might get difficult to see the road with no lane markings. What can we do about that? I mean, is that an AI? Is that a mapping question?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Interestingly, we actually have projects running with streetlight folks that in certain areas that have really poor visibility want to put down light lines on the road to help augment reality, essentially. So there's creative solutions like that coming, which, you know, may make sense for certain on-ramps or intersections or passes on a highway, but certainly are challenging to deploy everywhere. You know, the illumination that our technology delivers can just give you the highest possible visibility. And so if white and or IR with high intensity can help augment the camera systems and the human eye, we're doing that in every possible way. If there's just a total absence, right, of any kind of markings at all, and you don't have the new age line generating streetlights that may come in certain very specific use cases, then yeah, I think you're really looking at some kind of AI. You're looking at GPS. You're looking at other ways where a smart city or just a smart county, you know, can help solve the problem beyond the vehicle.
Thanks a lot. Okay, guys, now here's the question I've been dying to ask all of you. I prepared you guys a little bit, but in fact, judging from the response I'm getting for readers, it's the number one question for most Canadians. When will we be getting to full autonomy? No matter where we go, no matter what conditions we can drive without our cars turning into bumper cars. And of course, guys, we're in Canada here, not California. So I'm hoping we can, you know, discuss the winter conditions that I've given you. I'm not looking for exact dates. I know you guys didn't bring a crystal ball with you, but I'd like, you know, some idea of a timeline of 5-10 years, or even better, some technology breakthrough that will signal to you that, okay, truly autonomous vehicles are ready for consumers. Is there anything like that? Ryan, I know you're not Canadian, but your lab is in Detroit. You come from northern Michigan. Why don't you give us your sense of when all of this might come, or what the signal might be that we're there?
Yeah, thanks, David. There's a couple of factors, I guess, that I would think about to me. So definitely on the weather side of things, I mean, that is a huge challenge, I think, for the industry. And when we think about really those level 4 or level 5 sorts of automation, and in particular, level 5 means that the car can drive anywhere, anytime, sorts of scenarios. And, you know, and having grown up in northern Michigan, you know, when I think about, like, what does it mean to drive on a snow-covered road? It's one thing to know actually maybe what lane you're in. Maybe maps can help you to understand what lane you're in. But actually, the more interesting side of this problem is like anybody that's driven on a snow-covered road knows that, well, you don't actually drive in the lane, you drive in the tire tracks of the guy in front of you, right? The social norm of what it means to drive is, I think that's a big challenge, an open challenge for us. It's actually predicting human behavior and understanding the social ballet of driving. So I think that is one of the kind of open challenges that we have in this space. So when I think about that example of snow-covered roads, another one that comes to mind for me is think about, when does a green stoplight not mean go? Imagine that a police officer standing at the side of that green stoplight with their hand up like this. We all know how to interpret that scene, right? But for an AI system, this is some of the really kind of hard elements of that kind of top-down reasoning. So understanding that it's an officer on the side of the road, you see the police cruiser over there with the lights flashing. Maybe you understand that the baseball game just got out, or maybe the hockey game in Canada, and you're trying to manage the pedestrian kind of crowd flow. Those types of problems are kind of still distant, I would say, from where we are in terms of some of the AI reasoning that we can bring to bear to this. And when we think about automated vehicles on mixed infrastructure where we have other human drivers, it's going to be really some of the challenges of predicting other human behavior, other drivers, other pedestrians. Those are some of where we still need some big breakthroughs, I think, in automated driving to really get to, when will my car be able to drive for me anywhere, anytime? I still think that is in the distant future.
Stephanie, you have a car, Autonomous. I've been in it. It's wonderful. It's being used specifically for winter testing. So, what is your group's best guess, or what are you waiting for Autonomous to be able to get through a winter?
Yeah, the Autonomous is a lot of fun, and we have a lot of fun with it. I think actually opinion has changed on this, or I would say grown a little bit more optimistic in the last few years with the advancements research and technology has made in computing power, AI. And so I think when we can nail down kind of that sensor fusion and have the infrastructure, so I imagine you'll see fully autonomous vehicles in designated locations as allowed by your provincial and municipal governments. So we'll have fully autonomous cars, I think, before we have fully autonomous available roads. So you'll be able to purchase a fully autonomous vehicle, but you will only have the authority to drive it in that condition in certain locations. And I would say, as a child of Back to the Future, if the hoverboards have given us any indication of like overestimating time, so between, somewhere between those, this is my wild guess, but I would like to see, 20 years we'd get there. And I don't know whether that sounds optimistic or pessimistic at that point, but that's just me. And again, coming with a Back to the Future lens.
Thank you very much. I like that analogy a lot. Ron, a slightly different way of asking the same question. What are your industry partners setting as goals? What are their short-term, what are their long-term goals? Not only to bring autonomous cars to the masses, but to make Canada a leader in autonomy.
Yeah, so I would echo, Ryan, what Ryan said is there's a lot of use cases and different problems that we need to solve. And when I say like what our industry partner is doing is being at the forefront of all of it. So as we drive forward, what we're seeing in Ontario is everybody driving to be the leader in solving the next problem that's at the industry's table. And so, and I'll give a really great example of that. Last week, Gatic, which started off in Palo Alto and is now landed in Toronto and it has opened up and is growing in Toronto, announced that they got support through the Ontario government through AVEN to winterize their technology, and they're already doing work with Walmart and Loblaws. And so, if you go back to what's industry saying in our region and when's it coming, going back to using Ryan's position on this, there are a lot of problems and challenges that we need to solve before they become, fully deployed. But what we're seeing in Ontario is that everybody's looking to Ontario because of the environment that's been set up by the government, because of fantastic research groups and post-secondary institutions like the University of Waterloo. The industry in our jurisdiction is coming here to make sure that they're always one step ahead of what the next challenge is that's facing the industry. We talk a lot about winterized technology, and again, through Driving Prosperity, the government of Ontario's plan for our auto sector, they actually deployed a program called Winter Tech to leverage the weather in Ontario and help develop the next solutions that will overcome harsh weather conditions as we drive forward into the future of this sector. And so we talk about winter, what about rural roads and talking about lane marking? So these are all the different use cases, problems. As you heard, everybody's working on it. What we're hearing from industry in Ontario is they want to work on it in Ontario because the environment is right here, and they want to commercialize their solution and get into the global market.
Well, let's hope that it's like batteries and that we can take that technology and sell it around the world. I mean, God knows the automotive industry in Ontario has just taken a great step forward. So that'll be one more. I'm going to move on to some reader questions now. And so this isn't me setting you guys up anymore. This is my readers asking. Rich says, after working as a repair person on microprocessor controlled devices for over 20 years, I have major concerns about electronic component failure. What assurances do we have that an autonomous vehicle will not drive over a cliff due to component failure? Is anybody, Paul, is it all about redundancy? What can we do about this?
Yeah, I mean, that's the a really great question that ties also into the question of time, of how soon can this innovation, this technology be ready to achieve, say, level 4? What you've got are the world's best companies, working on the ability to fuse all these sensor inputs together in order to try to then create action on the autonomous vehicle that's going to be safe. But the levels of reliability, the levels of allowable failure are orders of magnitude more challenging than in a consumer electronic gadget, right? So it's absolutely all about redundancy in a chipset or in a processor or in the AI, but also redundancy in sensors, and even in the ability to, if there is triggered, some kind of triggering event where you lose signal, what to do about that, right? To just power down the and this is a really big challenge that the consumer electronics industry hasn't had to face. The ambition of the community, that sort of piece of the community in this world of autonomous is extremely high. I mean, folks are talking about within 5 years achieving level 4. It's really aggressively ambitious. And you need that vision, that goal, at least, to drive forward. But it's this, a 10 or 20 year horizon certainly sounds a whole lot more realistic, given the fact that you've got such an incredible level of scrutiny and reliability in these systems that's required. So I think that drives right into the timing question of how soon could it be. And I think Canada's in a wonderful position because of the ability to test in harsh conditions. I mean, if you have an autonomous vehicle and you live in the Mid-Atlantic, in Virginia or something, snows a couple times a year, but that can't mean that the vehicle doesn't operate or that the whole community shuts down. So it's really a challenging problem, and I think timing is the issue. Another reason why we're sort of coming from the bottom to help enable level 2, level 3 at just the sensing headlight aspect first, along the way to what's going to be a longer time frame for just complete full autonomy in every single driving condition.
Thanks a lot. In a similar vein, a number of people seem to be worried about the security of their connected cars. Ian asks, how will consumers be assured that hackers into connected can't get into connected auto systems will not be able to cause accidents. Good God! I mean, we've all seen what cars are used for in some circumstances. Ryan, how does a major automaker like Toyota protect the security of its cars' connected and electronic systems?
Yeah, no, it's definitely top of mind, and obviously, cybersecurity is something we think about, have to design it from the very beginning. And in fact, if you look at even some of the research that happens in academia, we have Paul here talking about the sensing technology. There's even thinking about people that are trying to demonstrate hacks through sensors, where can you put kind of weird markers are out in the environment that might trick a camera system into believing a different interpretation about the world. So yeah, I guess fundamentally we think about all the different facets of cybersecurity, whether that's from sensing to the onboard compute, to then think about as cars become connected. Now we're going to have connectivity to the cloud and talking to other vehicles. We have to build in cybersecurity from the very beginning, and so that's here within the Toyota Research Institute. I'm responsible for the AI side of it, but we have within Toyota, like our sister companies, Toyota Connected and other business units, where that is their top mission statement, and where they're helping to partner with us on addressing the cybersecurity aspects.
Good. Well, we're all glad. We're hoping that all automakers are as diligent, because I've heard some stories of, in years previous, it's become more adamant about in terms of the security, but in previous years where it was pretty easy to hack into a Jeep or something like that. Here's another perplexing question. Just like there are lanes exclusive to high occupancy vehicles, Carl wonders if some roads would be designated exclusive to autonomous vehicles. For example, he says Highway 400. Now, forgetting the fact that at least two of you don't know what the Highway 400 is, that doesn't matter. But I guess the more important question here is whether we have to keep human and robot robot-driven cars separate. Is that a good policy? I mean, will there be one highway for robot cars and one highway for driven cars, or can we actually get along? Stephanie, why don't you handle that one?
I mean, my first question to you is, do you foresee government wanting to pay for two separate highways?
Okay, you got me. You got me good. You got me good. Okay.
I would say there's a lot of work being done in this area because, we have the human factor. And that's kind of the most dangerous part, is not an autonomous vehicle, but an autonomous vehicle combined with a driver vehicle, because the driver vehicle is very unpredictable. But, and I love how Ryan talks about, the superhuman driver and some of that augmenting driver capabilities, because in that scenario, it's the same idea. And if it's just an autonomous vehicle, it is a superhuman driver, and it can sense what the other driver's doing. So I think we'll see highways that are shared. You might have designated lanes particularly, but the autonomous vehicles, and I'm sure government legislation will ensure that, or put this in legislation, and it'll be that the autonomous vehicle, in order for it to be able to be licensed on a public road like the 400, it must have the ability to detect other drivers and show that when another driver is making an obvious mistake, it must correct in a way that is safe for the entire situation.
Okay. Well, I guess, like Rodney King says, we can all get along. The difference in rules of the road is on a lot of people's minds. Alex asks, how will AV technology handle the different traffic acts of each province? And as proof that he's serious at the question, he actually looked it up, and he says, for instance, passing in an emergency vehicle is different in Ontario from BC. Rod, in your capacity of dealing with this on a government level, are governments talking to each other at all about the rules of the road and how they'll affect autonomous cars, or are we still operating in silos?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I can't speak for the government, but I can tell you that often in anything when it comes to rules of the road and laws and regulations, there are cross-provincial and even national discussions that happen in terms of, especially with places like Canada and the U.S., where we share border crossings. And so I think the discussions are always happening right now as we talk about regulations, policies, standards, and they will continue to happen. But again, it's all going to be up to where the technology takes us, because at this point, going back to everybody's discussion, there's a lot of edge cases, sort of like the edge case that was just identified there, in terms of how do we deal with those different challenges. And it's not as easy as right now where an automaker has a standard in one country versus another country. This is actually, this is Ryan's bread and butter, is trying to figure out how to turn the AI to the jurisdiction that they're in and the rules are in, because they're a global automaker selling cars across the globe. And so going back to the question, conversations happen frequently in terms of harmonization, in terms of how to ensure that these things are working across provinces and then working on a national. But it'll be important to understand where the technology goes with that in order to be able to actually have those discussions, because like we said, we're kind of pushing into level 3 right now. Some of those discussions will be when level 4 starts to take shape, which will be much in the future, as we kind of identified some of the problems, challenges, and use cases that we need to overcome before we can get there.
Okay, thanks a lot. Ryan, same sort of question, but I'll ask it more specifically. Can, automated cars, autonomous cars require being mapped? Can it be made automatic, in fact? I think you guys call it geofencing, where the car recognizes where it is, and you actually change the traffic rules accordingly. Could it be really that simple?
Well, yeah, sure. It sounds simple. I think logistically it's kind of a nightmare. And so here in the U.S., we have a patchwork of state level kind of regulation across the states. I think ultimately we'd like to see some kind of national level of standards so that driving in Massachusetts is not really different than driving in Michigan than it is driving in Montana. But there's actually another facet I'd like to maybe touch upon, which is actually when you think about driving in different communities, driving in Boston is different than driving in Detroit than it is driving in Rome. So when we think about it from a global perspective, I would actually say the social ballet of driving and what is considered the norm in driving, having driven in Rome before, I feel like that's a sport there. So I think being able to, for an autonomous vehicle to be on, mixed infrastructure with other human drivers, and for it to be doing what is considered to be predictable and normal, right, from societal norms. That's actually another challenge, I think, from a technology perspective of like, how do we allow these systems to kind of adapt to the regional behaviors or kind of social norms of what driving customs are. So that's also on the technology side, I guess, one of the challenges we have of thinking about from a global perspective.
Well, I've got to tell you, I don't think I'm going to get a better quote than the social ballet of driving. In fact, with your permission, I think I'm going to use that in my Friday column, if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, for sure, yeah.
Well, these have been really great questions, guys, and I've got so many more, but we kind of have to shut things down. We're at the end of our time. And it's kind of lucky for you guys. I do that. Maybe I don't get to ask you the hard questions like, who's going to insure these cars? Will it be the automaker in charge of them, Ryan? Will it still be an individual who owns an autonomous car? Those questions I know you can't answer. But anyways, we're wrapped up. I need to thank you very, very much for illuminating. I mean, it's been really excellent. I think you've brought some clarity to the people of Ontario and Canada as to what to look for when we want to get hopeful that autonomous cars will finally be here. Okay, so I thank you all. I thank everyone that attended. I'd remind everybody to bookmark March 24th at 11 a.m. for Driving into the Future's Roundtable on Sustainability and Innovation. And of course, hit up my Motor Mouth column every Friday on Driving.ca. To Ryan, I say thank you for making time in your busy day. Stephanie, thanks for the update on, from, I think, the leading university in Canada, maybe even North America, researching autonomous automobiles. Paul, I just can't wait for this laser revolution. I want one in my car. I want one on my bike. I want one on every vehicle I have. And Rad, thanks for giving us a little more insight in how Ontario might become a hub for self-driving cars. Thank you all again, and I thank all the readers and viewers for watching.
Thank you.